Hello and welcome to the Apiary. This is Jake B-Man with Golden Fox Farms, here to talk about weighing hives. I am a big fan of weighing hives because weighing hives keeps you from overfeeding. It removes a lot of the guesswork in your winter management. If you have hives dialed into a target weight, everyone has enough on them to go into winter with a chance of success. It also keeps you from, having those starve out hives. Now, the problem with the heft method is, one, everything starts to feel heavy after a while, and two, you can end up overfeeding. And overfeeding can be just as detrimental for the beekeeper as underfeeding. Feed has costs, and if the bees have a bunch of feed stuck in the box in the spring, that's going to be something you're going to have to manage around and get them to use. So it's just better to just nail your target weights and let that ride. I myself aim for 90 pounds with doubles, 90 pounds or higher. This is a double hive here we'll be messing with. Singles, I aim for 70 or higher. I know with that, I'm most likely going to have enough food in that hive where I don't need to feed them before we're in spring and the flow is on. Now that said, I will continue weighing hives through winter. Um, and if a hive goes, 15 or 20 pounds below that target weight, like if a double goes down to 70 or a single goes down to 55, uh, I consider that my inflection point, and I add feed at that time. I usually add 10 pounds of feed because that's an easy way to make sure I'm in the safe zone again. But your individual feeding requirements will vary, and your weight requirements will vary. This is 10 frame equipment from everywhere. I got some of everything in this yard. So I can't really say different equipment has different weights. It does. You'll have to kind of see what your equipment weighs and come up with your own figures that make sense for this kind of stuff. So let's talk about weighing things. Let's start with this 5-pound plate and see what we figure out. This ostensibly is a 5-pound barbell plate. Now this is a luggage scale. I just use a basic luggage scale for weighing hives. And we'll use this to weigh this plate. This is just the electronic one they had at Walmart, and I bought it because it was the one they had that day. Any pull type scale should work for you. Now, the first thing you do is see how much this thing weighs. It's kind of a proof of concept, okay? Let this thing zero itself, hook on, and weigh. And you can't see what I'm seeing, but this comes in at 5.2 pounds. If I hook it up and weigh it like that, this is 5.2 pounds according to my little scale, okay? Now, the thing is, we don't have to lift stuff up all the way in the air totally off the ground to weigh them, because that can be a pain in the keister. We could just weigh the side of it, okay? Like, as long as the weight is held at the extreme ends of the object, half the weight will be on my finger, and half the weight will be going into the surface. So we can use this to weigh just half the hive at a time, so we're not having to hoist the whole thing in the air, because hoisting 90 pounds every time doesn't sound very fun to me. So let's see if this holds out. It was 5.2 pounds when I lifted the whole thing up. If I just do half of it, 2.6. Is that right? That's perfect. That's perfect. Now we can screw this up. And this is where a lot of beekeepers don't quite catch this. And that is if we're not weighing end to end. Okay? If we're not weighing end to end, I can tell you the load on my finger right now is less than it was, because we have all this weight that's on the other side of our fulcrum here. This weight is counterbalancing some of this weight, and this is going to give us an artificially low value when we weigh it. Let's see what we come up with. 2.2. So if we were trying to weigh this and we weighed this side and it was whatever it was, 2.2, and we doubled that, we'd say this plate's 4.4 pounds, even though it's closer to 5.2 pounds. So that's some of the importance on measuring from the outside edge. Now let's measure this deep and see where we can encounter that same kind of problem. All right, as you can see, I use ladder style racks because it lets me have a lot of hives in one spot, and they're convenient working height. Now with this, I'm going to slide this forward actually because it's kind of slid back. Oh! With this, if I weigh from this area here, because it's going to sit on these outside rails, and the other side will do the same thing, if I lift here, I'm getting half the weight of the hive-ish. If I lift back here, this part that's over that front edge, it's over that fulcrum, it's going to start counterbalancing. It's going to give me a false value. It's going to give me an artificially low value. Artificially low isn't bad if it means you're feeding more, necessarily. But, you know, if you have a target weight, you're wasting time and money overfeeding. So let's actually weigh this hive. When you weigh hives, you just want to barely lift it off. And this is 29.4 pounds. And the reason why you want to barely lift off that surface is, again, we're not going to start counterbalancing the other side. I've already forgotten what I said. Let me measure that again. We'll call that 29.9. 30 for easier math. I think it was 29.4 last time. Oh, now the other side, I'm going to weigh it as well. A lot of people don't do this part. And in this case, it really didn't matter. This side's 31 pounds. So with that, I can say this hive weighs 60, right at 60 pounds. So I'll write the pounds, and I'll write the date so I know what day I weighed this thing on. Gosh, I think it's the 18th. I don't know anymore. So we have that. Now, if we didn't measure it end to end, what will we come up with? Let's find out. Oh, it's going to be pretty close. 31 on this side. Of course, this ladder rack somewhat balances the amount of pullover. Up, 31.22. So according to this, it's just 55 pounds, which means we got an artificially lower weight by 5 pounds. Not doing it side to side, where the whole load was carried on the outer dimensions of what we were weighing. Now, one last thing I'll add. There's a reason I weighed this side and the other side and didn't just add it up. Sometimes, depending on weather and other apiary conditions, the bees might preferentially store honey on this side versus this side. Case in point, if it's already getting kind of cool, they'll tend to put the food and they'll put the brood nest towards the front and the food towards the other side. The front being the side closer to the sun. Often you'll weigh one side and the other side will be off by 5 or 6 pounds, which can increase or decrease your weighing by about 10 pounds. So just things to be considerate of when you weigh your hives. Now here's where all that talk about measuring actually starts to make sense and why it's important. I'm mixing 2-to-1 feed right now. This is my mixing setup. I mix it right in the back of the truck because that way I don't have to move or do anything else with it. You can see how dense it is because the sugar is floating on top of this when we first put it in. And it takes a while for it to bust apart when it is this wet, or rather this heavy of a syrup. This will be my 375th pound going in. I'm making a 50-gallon batch. That's going to be 375 pounds of sugar and 188 pounds of water. What's 188 pounds of water? Golly. It's about 20. 22, I think is what it is. Now, you always make a mess when you're making syrup, but there's also costs involved. This barrel, you know, there's 15, 20-pound bags in there. If those bags are $20 each, this is a $300 barrel. Now, when I feed hives, the finished weight roughly is 50 cents a pound. So if I measure a hive and I can get right to that perfect amount, I can feed it perfect. Now, you guys remember when I was weighing that hive, one way I weighed it, it would be 5 pounds off. It came out as 5 pounds heavier or 10 pounds heavier. Well, that would be another $2.50 a feed, which doesn't sound significant until you have a couple hundred hives. I have about 150, And 5 pounds off of each one of those, it adds up to whatever that would come down to. So, other things to think about. If you overfeed, that syrup's there in the spring, and you gotta get rid of it. You gotta move it to nukes, gotta do something with it, you gotta manage your way out of that. Excuse me while I help bust up these floating sugar blobs. There's a trolling motor head somewhere down in here, but it's about 2 feet beneath where my hand is. And I'll actually shove these blocks down into that fan blade and have them busted up. Uh, so if you overfeed, you gotta get rid of it in the spring. You gotta move it on the nukes or do something with it. If you underfeed, you're gonna have to do emergency feeding in the wintertime or lose your colonies. Neither of those are enjoyable either. So it really is best to get it dialed in perfect. Now, if you remember when I weighed the hives differently as well, like if I had just taken the back measurement, I would have inflated the weight of that hive by 10 pounds, which would have left it with just about 30 pounds of feed instead of my normal 40 if I fed it. If I had just gone off the front measurement, I would have fed it an additional 10 pounds it didn't need. And that's a whole frame and some change lost to syrup that you don't need in the spring. So, taking the time to get it dialed in where you need it can save you a lot of effort on the back end, more than most people would realize the $12 scale can get you. Now, I like to feed using top feeders because when I feed heavy syrup, I want it to go in pretty dang fast. And top feeders, the big ones, give you a decent balance between gallonage and cost and how fast they can pull it. I like the all wood ones just because I have less issues with the bees getting in the hijinks with them. This is an all wood. This is the date ant one. Quite literally, it's the date ant one. And they say it holds 3.5 gallons. Well, I have this barrel of water here that says it's 3.5 gallons. So let's find out how close they are to actually being 3.5 gallons. Now this is on a slight incline, so it's going to lose a little bit. We'll just have to adjust its numbers up to be fair. I'm splashing a little bit out. Okay. So I bet if I lifted the back, we can get this pretty close to perfect. I might get a little bit of water into my mix. Life will go on. Okay. Now, if we remember this barrel, I had it labeled. So it looks like it holds a little more than 3 gallons, but not quite the 3.5 that was advertised, which is not abnormal at all for the manufacturers. So it'll put 3 gallons in a hive at a time, which means each side holds 1.5 gallons. If your finished syrup puts roughly 10 pounds of added weight onto your hive for each gallon, this will add 30 pounds per trip, or 15 pounds if you only fill one side of it. So if I have a hive that's 15 pounds short, I could just feed one side. If I have it's 30, I could feed both. If I have a hive that's 20, I could fill this one all the way, and then fill this one about halfway, and I'd put 21 pounds in there roughly, which is a pretty good guesstimate to get your hives dialed in about perfect. They do pull down the 2-to-1 very quickly if they have the comb space in the workforce to do it. Just like 1-to-1, you can go through 1 gallon a day depending on the hive. They'll pull it down fast, which is good because you want them to convert it to finished honey stores, finished feed. So let's reiterate. This barrel has 375 pounds of sugar, 188 pounds of water to make a 2-to-1 mix. That's about 50 gallons on the schnoz. When I use this, each gallon that goes on the hive will be finished out to about 10 pounds, 9.55 pounds finished weight once they dry it and cap it. So if I have a hive that's short 10 pounds, they get 1 gallon of feed. The feed does get expensive, not just in the mixing and buying aspect, because again, we're talking 15 bags at $20 a bag. It's about $300. There's also the time commitment and putting these feeders on hives and everything else. So if you don't have to feed a hive, don't. And bees are expensive, so if you do have to feed a hive, do. And weighing just helps you get it so much more precise. If you're using the heft method, you could wildly under or overfill barrels. And again, if or rather overfill hives. And again, if you're overfilling a hive, you're making work for yourself in the future. If you're underfilling that hive, they're at real risk of starving through winter. Because with my 70 and 90 pound finish weights, you're really talking just 40 pounds of food. So if you're 20 pounds off, either way, that's going to be a big thing to deal with. Now, the last step I kind of do with my feed syrup is I actually acidify it. The most nectars are acidic, and the way do that is actually just use apple cider vinegar because it's kind of you could use white vinegar too, but apple cider vinegar, you know, kind of that hippie thought maybe it's got some extra juju in their form that we don't know about. So what I'll do is I'll add half of this gallon to this tank, and that'll pull the pH down to around 4.5, somewhere in the mid fours. The invertase enzyme functions best at a pH of 4.5. Now the vinegar forms a buffer. I'll do it this way so you can see the vinegar going in. The vinegar forms a buffer at around 4.7 pH. So it's actually a very stable additive as far as hitting the right pH. The other perk of this is kind of like if you're doing refrigerator pickles, it helps preserve it. And the reason why I do this part last is the bees really can't smell the sugar syrup, but they can smell this, and they're going to start visiting here as this stuff finishes up. I'll let this run, and the motor has one higher setting. Let's see if it splashes out when I set it to that. It's thinking about it, but it's staying in there. I'll let this run until all the syrup is smooth. If I reach my hand in and it still has grittiness in the syrup, it's not fully mixed. And sometimes this will be another 10 or 15 minutes to get this fully mixed. Once it's fully mixed, I'll put my pump head on here, and then we'll go fill some hives. Welcome back to the apiary. This is Jake B-Man out here feeding some hives, and I'm going to show you the rest of the pump system that I use as a sideliner. Okay, here's my sideliner pump system. Here's what all comes into action. This is a pair of 55-gallon drums. I would load them to 50 gallons, a 2-to-1, which is like 580 pounds each, plus the weight of the barrel. So that keeps me within my weight limits for this vehicle. It also means I, at most, have a 50-gallon tank sloshing. I don't have like a tote splashing around back here, which can make your ride pretty unwieldy. I have a pump mounted straight on the bulkhead of that tank. It's just a little farm pump, little 5500, 5.5 gallon pump, and I run it off the truck's battery system because it's a 12-volt appliance. It goes into a 3/4 hose, which goes to the classic gas gun nozzle. Now, really, a gas gun nozzle, I'd be better off just using a quarter turn valve, really. But this does work fairly well. It's not the fastest one in the world. These are those all wood feeders that are 3 gallons each. This gun and pump system takes about a minute to fill a 3-gallon feeder. That sounds like a long time or a slow pump, and the reason why it's so slow, even though that pump's rated for 5.5 gallons a minute, sugar syrup is a lot heavier than most fluids, a lot more viscous, and it's just harder for the pump to move those. I could upgrade to a higher flow pump. They cost a lot more, and I can't get one off the shelf as easily. And what that means for me is if I have a pump breakdown, I'm stuck compared to the pump that I can get from a, Tractor Supply or Rural King type of store, which is in most every small farming community is fairly close to one somewhere. So they work fairly well for this application. Now, if I doubled my flow rate, I would take my feeding from 1 minute per hive. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo! I have a cut on that hand, and I just put the board right onto it. I would go from 1 minute per hive to 30 seconds. Well, it's going to take a whole lot of feeder filling to make that make sense. Alrighty, so I've put their lid back on. These are some touchy girls. They're a little bit quick to respond. So I'm going to note that I added 30 pounds. That way when I come back, I know this hive should be about 110. Let's go ahead and fill up another one over here, another two, while we're at it. These are both 50 pounders, and in doubles, that's not good at all. These all woods will mildew up on you. The 2-to-1 syrup is rather dry and tends not to have any issues with that. 1-to-1's more likely to do it. You can just bleach these, which is what I do. So even though they look kind of filthy, they're actually quite clean. The 2-to-1 syrup won't have mold and mildew issues near as much as 1-to-1. Why most of these are mildewed is if I leave them on a hive over a winter, the the unused syrup absorbs atmospheric moisture, and then it gets to the point where it mildews up and all that stuff happens. You want to drizzle just a little on the bees' heads, because that way they know to look for something over them. All right, let's put that hive back together the way I found it. And I'm going to close off that forward entrance by pulling that cover back as far as it can. And again, I'm going to note 30 pounds added, because that feeder holds right at 3 gallons. And I know I just added 3 gallons because that's what that feeder holds. And I know those gallons finish off at around 10 pounds a gallon. So let's say I spent some money on a much better pump. Went from this 3 gallon a minute thing to a 6 gallon. The reality is shooting 50 gallons of syrup at 3 gallons a minute, 10 minutes, you're 30 gallons. You're still less than 20 minutes, even with this slow pump per barrel pumped out. If we got another $300 and spend it on our pump, or another $400, we could double that potentially. I'm only saving 10 minutes per barrel. It's going to take a long time to pay off that extra pump capacity. So I'm quite fine using this more dinky setup for now, for my scale. And the bees, you can actually shoot right on top of the bees. It won't kill them. They'll just ride the slats up. Again, I'm pulling it back to close off that front entrance. So plus 30, that's going to be 80 pounds now. It's a lot closer to winter weight for me. I want these to have 90 pounds when they're doubles for going into winter. Now, I got to feed this triple, oddly enough. They have bees in all 3 boxes, but they don't have much food. Why would they? Make life easy on me. So let's get in here and see what we end up with. Yeah, this hive's 97 pounds. It should be about 115, being a triple. Alrighty. I'm going to smoke them down just because I want to put a pollen patty on top. With pollen patties, you're always better off busting these things into little pieces, because it makes it easier for the bees to deal with hive beetles they might encounter. So that's on there. Put our feeder on there. I don't bother noting the added weight of the patty. It's negligible. It's right at a pound. I'm trying my best to drown that one bee, and she's just not going to drown, is she? All right. That's it for this apiary. Time to go to the next one. Good luck out there and happy beaking.